Okay, YouTubers, this is my second attempt to try to go into the open source world. We'll see if it works out or if this will be the end of it. I'll just stick to Android video games. Okay, so the last time I talked about this, I did some UI binding on the fly with GWT, and I put it on some forums, and there was some interest. But it was said that we need some code to actually see what's going on. So I made a light version of my demo, and I made it GWT only. You can see the demo here. You put text on the top, and HTML, and then these special span tags. So example of a span tag is right here. This produces a text box, and you hit this button and it generates something down there. This allows you to use HTML and GWT widgets. It's unlike the GWT binding, which is part of GWT, in that GWT binding requires compilation. There are some problems out there that require like forms to be defined on the fly, and the form metadata to be stored at the database, and you can be able to see the form or the form change depending on maybe people want to add questions or remove questions. So an example being, adding a question here, and this would be stored in the database, and then this would get rendered. The features I added today were some text boxes and a submit button, and I'll show you in a minute in the code how easy it is to add stuff. So, and when you hit the submit button, it shows the answers in a name value pair kind of way. I didn't put tables in here because GWT doesn't have it has the cell objects, but I will put the cell objects in there. I just wish it had a better table implementation. Okay, so let me give a brief overview of the code. The code is checked in, by the way. There's my Pandora. The code is checked in at GWT binding fly at googlecode.com or codegoogle.com. Here is all the code. Download it. If you want to be a contributor, just email me. Let me walk through some of the points of the code that have interest. You can see it's actually a very small code base. This is it. This is all that's there. I'll briefly walk through them really quick. This is nothing but the entry point class. It does pretty much nothing. So there's nothing really to look at in here. This sets up the UI that you see in the demo by adding the YouTube link, putting the edit box, and then the button that moves the value from the edit box to the rendering widget. Now, I called it the request rendering widget because the original purpose was for request forms, but it can be changed to just rendering widget. This is where the meat is, so check it out. This goes through that HTML and injects containers and injects widgets. This is a little Pojo that encapsulates the idea of a widget and an injectable widget object. I'll explain to you what that is in a minute. Here's a widget factory. You can see this is all the code in the widget factory. There's injectable widgets and injectable containers. So a widget would be a text box, a container would be a simple panel or a tab panel or something like that. And this would be given an element that the rendering widget would believe would be a special span widget, and if it is such of a widget, it'll go in here and it will create that widget. The widgets that we want to create are injected, and let's see, I'll show you. They're injected here in this dynamic rendering widget. You inject them whenever you want, as long as they're injected before the binding button is pushed. And you can see I've injected 3 types of widgets that we're going to use. Text area, text box, submit button, and I also did panel. I only had 3 hours to do this, so all this code was kind of organized in 3 hours, so I didn't do any more than this. Alright, so you got the rendering factory, you got the rendering widget. Let's go into these. Let's skip these for a minute and go to these interfaces. This is an injectable widget. So these are some methods that are required on top of the widget that are used to instantiate the widget and do special things like get the value, execute post-processing, stuff like that. The idea of this is you can use a GWT widget or a GXT widget. It doesn't matter. This is a nice clean interface so that the rendering widget doesn't care what the underlying widget was implemented in. And here are a few extra methods for a container widget. So if you wanted to, have text boxes, let's say, you would implement the injectable widget, and the init would create a text box. That simple. You could use attributes in the span to set variables in that text box. You can make your own custom widget. You can use a GXT widget. You could use a smart widget. This is totally flexible. There's some other fields in here. Does it require post-processing? You'll see that the submit button does, because it needs to have knowledge of the other fields. And then returning value. Now, some may say, why am I saying get value and then get value? Well, different fields, especially when you go to GXT, get values differently. And in this implementation, I haven't solved the table problem, but if there is interest, it's really easy to solve. Let's really quick look at the submit button. One big difference here is it does post-processing. Post-processing equals true. If post-processing equals true, after all the widgets have been rendered and instantiated, this method will be called of any object that requires post-processing. And what will be passed in is a map of all the widgets that have been rendered. This is important for the submit button because on click, we want to make that XML of name value pairs. So we run through the rendering widgets and get their values. As you can see, that's pretty much it. It's a very small amount of code. The purpose of this first drop is not to say this is the infrastructure that we should use, but it is defining a pattern that is extremely simple and I think extremely lightweight. And hopefully people at GWT will find it interesting. Thank you.